Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. Folks, it is Dr. King Day in America, and we've got a lot to say about our beloved civil rights and international leader. Today, we got to talk about what's going on in Wisconsin with the issue of voter suppression, where one state official admitted to the fact that he was happy that black folks didn't turn out as much as expected for the last national election. I'm going to share with you what he had to say. Also, can we talk a little bit about what the president's response when he talked yesterday to honor Dr. King, how he has a muted response to voter rights. Yeah, we'll be checking in with my brother, Dr. Jason Nichols, to get his take on it. Plus, let's talk about Dr. King and his history. There is a part of Dr. King's history that we don't talk about. I'm going to point it out for you. I'm going to lay it out for you, folks. And God willing, let's have a conversation about this, because we can talk about the greatness of Dr. King, but can we talk about his crucifixion? Got a lot to share with you. Stay with us. It's all happening on today's edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. All right, folks, welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us and being a part of the conversation. First and foremost, happy Dr. King Day. It is Dr. King weekend. We've been celebrating it all weekend long here on the Black Star Network. So if you have not seen some of the conversations that Big Brother Roland has been having with some luminaries from the civil rights movement, from the social justice movement, make sure y'all check out blackstarnetwork.com, and you can see what Brother Roland has been talking about. He had a very fascinating conversation with Reverend Jesse Jackson. That's going to be that you can stream right now, and a whole lot more. Of course, there are a number of activities from this past weekend and even up to today, prayer breakfasts and a whole lot of conversations. I know that cities across the country are preparing for MLK Day parades here in Los Angeles. It's going to be happening soon. So there are a number of things that are happening across this country. And we're going to dive more into the life and the legacy and the great mission of Dr. King in a little bit. But first, I do want to bring you up to speed on some of the elements, some of the key issues that Dr. King really spoke out against, which was suppression, which was the issue of voting rights. And we know that this has been an ongoing issue, not just that past couple of years, but the past 50 years. And so we're seeing more and more how there has been a concerted effort, not from the police, not from other citizens, but how about from state officials who are encouraging folks to not get involved in the simple exercise, the simple right of casting a ballot. This is what we're seeing in the state of Wisconsin, folks. And it is mind-blowing that it's gotten to the point where now openly state officials have admitted that these level of voter suppression continues to happen, and they're happy about it. All right, let me first bring in my brother, Dr. Jason Nichols, who's a lecturer professor at the University of Maryland out of the African American Studies Department. Dr. Nichols, always a pleasure to talk to you, brother. How are you on this MLK Day?
I'm doing lovely. I'm blessed. It's good to be here with you, brother.
I appreciate it. We're going to get you in and out, brother, because I know your schedule is busy. But more importantly, I wanted to get your analysis about all of this that's happening. First, let's talk a little bit about Milwaukee. And I'm going to just jump right to it. Here's a Wisconsin Republican official. His name is Robert Spindell. He put out this piece that, guess what? He was happy that black folks did not show up for this past election, bragging about it. Look what he said, folks. Take a look at this quote from Mr. Spindell. Can't believe it is happening in 2023 and 2022. He said, we can be especially proud of the city of Milwaukee, 80.2% Democratic vote, casting 37,000 less votes than cast in the 2018 election, with a major reduction happening in the overwhelming Black and Hispanic areas. Wow. He's happy that black and brown folk aren't coming out to vote. Now, he's a longtime GOP activist in Wisconsin. He has been the chairman of the GOP's 4th Congressional District in Milwaukee and was one of the fake electors who claimed that Donald Trump won in Wisconsin. He's facing 3 lawsuits for his role in that attempted fraud. What do you say about this? And he's still holding office for the state of Wisconsin.
I mean, to me, it was not shocking that they feel this way. It was shocking that they said it out loud. We know that they're trying to suppress votes all over the country, particularly in a lot of these battleground states. And this has been an ongoing battle, as you stated, from the very beginning, going back, to the 15th Amendment. They've tried to suppress black votes. So it's not really a shock that this is going on. I was shocked that he said it. As a professor, I was a little perturbed by his grammar, which I thought, there's a difference, people, between less and fewer. You should use fewer under those circumstances if you're going to say 37,000, which is an actual number. But that aside, we know that Wisconsin at one point was the worst state for black people to live in. Like, literally, it was the NAACP, other organizations literally put it out there that Wisconsin was the very worst state for black people to live in. Worse than Mississippi, worse than all of Louisiana, many other states that actually have a long legacy of oppression and slavery. Wisconsin was the worst. So It tells you something about what's going on in that state and the kind of officials that they are putting up there. And that was an appointed position. He's on the, I believe he's on the election committee or the election council in that state. There's only 3 people on that, and he has an immense amount of power. And he credited, the ad campaign that they went on to keep black people from voting, telling them, don't vote. It's not going to change anything. And I will always say to any black person that has, says, voting doesn't matter. Though my response is always, if that were the case, they wouldn't put so many obstacles in the way of black people voting. They realize that voting is important. Now we're moving to a point where they're just trying to, completely undermine elections, but voting is important. Is it going to change everything? Absolutely not. There needs to be a combination of grassroots activism, voting, and other advocacy. But voting is a part of that equation, and we have to vote. If we want to address things like police brutality, right. On my podcast, I was just talking to a police chief, and we had a conversation. If you want to address police brutality, recognize that probably your sheriff in your area is an elected position.
Facts.
Your mayor certainly is elected, who chooses your police commissioner, but your sheriff is elected. You want people, killer cops, to be held accountable if they hold somebody down and tase them 7 times? Your DA is an elected position. So it's not only just the election, the big national elections that we have to come out for, and those are really important, but we have to come out and be educated voters in our local elections. And we talk about education. You're upset about education and the way we're educating young black men and girls. Your school board is elected. As a matter of fact, I would tell more people who are outraged about the way that we are educating in this country, run for school board. Don't just vote, run. You know what I mean? Recognize that you have that power, and black people, we need to execute that power, because guess what? They are trying to suppress our votes over and over and over again. And Mr. Spindell just proved it there in Wisconsin.
Well, right now he is facing calls to resign, Doc, because of these statements where he boasted, the low voter turnout from black folks. And he also has put in an email, folks. He sent an email to fellow Republicans where he had noted that he appreciated and he He thought that the party's well thought out, he used this term, well thought out, multifaceted plan that resulted in a drop in voter turnout was simply effective. So to your point, yes, he was excited and he helped it. The problem is, Doc, I don't think he's going to resign, for one. And two, we got people like him all over this country.
Absolutely. I think he needs, well, for that fake elector plot, he needs to be indicted.
Oh, yeah. He definitely needs to go to, at least go, he needs to visit somebody's court.
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? But see, here's that thing, though. Back to that point of, I mean, it's crazy because we all know that voter suppression is real. We also know that historically it has come from the GOP, the Republicans, because guess what? A lot more people are Democrats in this country based on the numbers. A lot more people are more lenient toward the Democratic side than the Republican side, even though you still got a nice size of people who are actually independent, right? That are growing. But the GOP has always been behind the scenes orchestrating voter suppression efforts because they know that that's one of the probably the few ways that they can actually win. And some of these local elections, some of these smaller elections that a lot of us don't even think about, right? We often been told to focus on the national stuff, but it is these local elections, like you said, for your judges, for your sheriffs, for the mayors, for the governors, those statewide and down elections. Those are the ones that make the difference, because whoever's in the state house, they control the board of elections for a given state, right? Right. They appoint certain people to run the board of elections. They have those relationships. So to connect the dots for people, that's the important part. And I'm not necessarily surprised with Mr. Spindell's comments. I am more waiting to see how will the ball drop on the other side, and more importantly, how. And we got 30 seconds before we take our first pause. But Doc, I want to know, in a situation like this, traditionally, historically, how do the voters respond? Because this could be a bombshell for us, because we're media, we talk about this stuff, you know what I'm saying, political conversations and political news. But for the average voter, does it really make a difference?
I hope that this is like a locker room quote, where we can put it up in our communities, and that African Americans in particular and Latinos who really make or break elections, we need to really put this out there and say they don't want you to vote. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit there on the sideline and do what they say, or are you actually going to make your voice heard and demand accountability in many different ways? And that's what I hope happens. And I'll just tell you one real quick story, because I know you got to go to break, but I'll tell you, I remember after Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, former governor of Virginia, got caught with blackface. Right. I was up at a particular, right-wing news station, and one of the things that there was a pro-Trump guy there, and he was just so happy. I mean, he was just so excited. And I remember he said to me, he's like, "Yeah, well, I think some black people aren't going to vote, and if black people don't vote, we win." He said it to me just plainly, like it was like.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised. He didn't say it on the record, but
I'm more surprised that he came up. I'm more surprised he said it to you in your face as a black man. But I'm not surprised that the mentality is there. I'm definitely not surprised. And guess what? Why are we still surprised? And I'm talking about black voters, right? Like black voters are acting like, man, no, nobody can be that's insensitive or that selfish or that mean or that. Yes, they can. Yeah, folks.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about winning. You know what I mean? It's all about winning.
I'm not surprised, man. I'm not surprised at all. Hey, Doc, I got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's continue the conversation. Also, I got to talk about what is President Biden's view on his voter efforts. He talked about, he spoke from Ebenezer Baptist Church yesterday, and of course, in honor of Dr. King. So we're going to share with you a little bit of what the president had to say around the issue of voting as well. Stay with us. Join us in the conversation. And stay tuned. We got a lot to cover in this first hour of The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We've been talking to Dr. Jason Nichols of the University of Maryland to talk about voter suppression, how in Wisconsin, folks, one Republican official, state official, has admitted and boasted and bragged about the fact that Black and Hispanic voters in Milwaukee did not come out as much for this past November election, and he was happy about it. And he admitted, folks, he said it like, hey, they didn't come out, and we're happy that they didn't come out. And so we're talking about this level of voter suppression and this level of glee that we're seeing from the other side, and most importantly, the impact that it makes on the exercise and the right for us to vote. Dr. Jason Nichols, always a pleasure to talk to you. So yeah, I'm not surprised, Doc. I'm not surprised that folk. What I am surprised about is how. What I will be surprised about is how will folks respond, right? How will the voters respond? Black folks, Hispanic folks, those who are often marginalized, how will we respond, right? And I think that part of it is that we got to just simply admit that this is happening. You know, here on the Black Star Network, Brother Roland talks extensively, not just him, but the fantastic panelists we have on his show, talk extensively about voter suppression. But you would think that this would be something brand new that Black folks heard sometimes. You know what I mean? Because when I be like voter suppression, like states still doing that, like damn near every state is still doing some level of voter suppression. If a Republican, and I'm gonna say it, if a Republican is in charge, it's happening. It's happening. I'm just going, hey, we got to call a spade a spade. If a Republican's in charge of the state, if they're in charge of the Board of Election, guess what's going to happen? Everybody ain't going to get the ballot. Everybody's not going to be able to go to cast their vote. And we're seeing this across the country. So I'm not surprised, Doc.
Right. And I'll tell you this, in Wisconsin, when you look at it, Mandela Barnes was really close to winning that election. He could have used those 37,000 votes, from his people, from his Black and Latino people. But they, again, they're really effective at it. They've been doing this for 150 years. This has been something, that they've been doing for a very long time, and they're very effective at it. And we have to find ways to counter it. And we have to make sure that the message is spread to everyone that voting does have a value. Voting is important. It's not just something that, things never change. There are other things we need to do. Absolutely. We need to come up with new economic solutions. We need to find, ways to fix schools besides, just voting. So your job is not done when you just cast a ballot. But that is part of it, in order to share in power, we have to do that. So these are, things that we need to really take seriously as a community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Conscious thought. And folks, I want to get your take on this as we talk about this issue of voter suppression. Then I'm going to throw something else into the mix when we talk about President Biden and his response to the larger conversation. But Conscious Thought, you kicked us off. You said, and that's the painful arrogance of it all. He knows, speaking of Mr. Spindell, he knows that his own won't do anything about the comment or illegality. And he's talking to our other culture crew member, Pauline Hunt. He said, of course they admit it, knowing nothing is going to be done about it. Of course. No repercussions, no consequences. It's like, it is what it is.
Yeah, I
This is the same. And folks, please don't expect the GOP to correct itself, because this is the same party. This is the same party that got George Santos, the liar. They still protect him. Still like, nothing's here. Nothing's wrong. This is the same party. We know he lied. But guess what? He's going to be your elected liar. So I'm not surprised. Conscious Thought, my guy, thank you so much. Valerie, you said it right. You said, why are we still surprised? We're not still. I know we're not surprised. Dr. Jason Nichols is not surprised. I know we're not surprised. But here's the thing, though. I think to this point, Doc, once a situation like this comes up, I think people some, not all, of course, but some of us feel defeated, right? Like, okay, so they're going to put up a resistance to this. And it's like, so what's the point, man? Like, they always seem to, and this is how I know a lot of Black folks. I know this, man. They always seem to get away with the stuff. So it's like, what's the point? Why are we even fighting this? Why are we even trying to make things right? Because there are no consequences. So I'm gonna pose this to you, Doc. What would you say to an individual who thinks this way?
I think the way that you make them face consequences, honestly, for elected officials, is voting. That's the way you make them face the consequences. You go out, you vote. Now, there are other things you can do, of course. We saw a lot of things. A lot of things are changing in our schools. Show up at the school board meetings. That's what the other side does. You know what I mean? They're engaged. They didn't even really get anything seriously done, but they're still out there at the school board meetings saying, we don't want to be taught about, the real Dr. King. We want the fake version. We don't want to be taught real history. We want our kids to learn the fake version or learn none at all. So we've got to counter that with our own activity. This is what Dr. King was all about, was direct action. So you need to do that. And with elected officials, they can't put people on election boards if you go and, vote them out and you get the right people in office. And again, we've also got to put, in some cases, those of us who have a little bit of a means, we've got to counter what they're doing. They're putting ads on the air. We've got to counter those ads. You know what I mean? We have to do everything we possibly can. I know Roland would plug Black Star Network, say, hey, listen, give to Farajii's show. Make sure you get some ads on Farajii's show. Yeah. And make sure that the community knows what's going on. That's the way you actually counter these bad faith actors that are mainly coming out of the GOP.
I think that too, and let me speak to that point too, Doc. I think some of us tend to believe, and I'm talking about us as I know some of our people think we're talking heads, like we're not actually connected to the direction action part. Like you're in the classroom, I do my community work and connecting with people on the streets and grassroots stuff. And it's like, sometimes that's just an anomaly, right? Because most people see us as talking heads. But I think in the talking head space, there's this assumption that Black folks don't know the importance of voting. And I push back on that. Right. I would push back on that. I think that a lot of our people, not just watchers of this show and this network, but I think a lot of Black people understand the importance of voting. What I don't think that we as talking heads catch on to, though, is that we don't understand that that's their form of resistance. That's their form of saying, the candidates that we're seeing right now don't speak to my interests. That's their form of saying, I'm tired of this system telling us all these promises and leaving us with heartbreak. That's their form of saying that, you know what? If my vote counted, then count the damn vote. Do it properly.
Right.
So I don't think, and we can't just naturally throw this blanket over like black people don't vote in droves. Every single election, and I'm talking about men and women, we're coming out. So in 2023, and now y'all can quote me on this, black people vote, but black people don't vote because they are tired of being lied to. They're tired. Our people are just tired of the bullshit, bro. That's what it comes down to. I don't think it's that we don't want to vote. We don't know how to vote. We don't understand the history of voting. We're just tired of the present modern day BS.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think you're right. Black people know the importance of voting, but I think black people also have voted in large numbers, sometimes larger than the national average for a long time, and then not seen things change in their communities. So I think a lot of times, there does tend to be an apathy, particularly with younger, black folks. When I'm in the classroom, I hear a lot of students who are like, yeah, I mean, I might vote. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something that they think is really something that changes things for them or for their parents or for their friends. And so I kind of get where they're coming from, to a certain degree. Right. My thing is, you have to understand that voting is only one part of it, but I think black people recognize the importance of voting. We would have never had an Obama administration, and a generation before, you would have never had Harold Washington in Chicago. You would have never had any of these. You wouldn't have a Joe Biden if it weren't for black folks. It's black folks that take people and make Democrats winners. They never win white women. They never win. They don't even come close with white men. They don't win white women. They win large numbers of black folks and just enough Latinos to win elections. And if you shave off even a little bit, and that's what Republicans realize. That's what they're saying. That's what Donald Trump was saying. I only need to find 11,780 votes. Is take the votes away from Fulton County, all those black folks. You can't find me somebody's address was wrong or something. You can't do that. Find me some votes or discount some of their votes.
Absolutely.
So black folks.
Let me, I don't mean to interrupt you. We got to take this pause, but when we come back, I want you to finish your thought because we're going to continue the conversation. I want to talk to us about what President Biden said at Ebenezer Baptist Church yesterday. And yeah, we're going to need to talk about some things. Stay with us, folks. We got a lot to cover as we continue the conversation about voter suppression and the time it takes for us to see some real justice in that area. Stay with us. We'll talk about it here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is peace.
Oh, no!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, excuse me. Welcome back to the show. We've been talking about voter suppression and talking about the impact that it's making, as we see in the state of Wisconsin, how one Republican official has been criticized and even has been asked to step down from his position as a Wisconsin state official because of his recent comments where he bragged and boasted about Black and Latino and Hispanic voter turnout being low. Now, that's one side of the conversation. I want to bring in the other side of the discussion. That's what we're seeing on the state level. Well, what about what's happening on a national level? I want to share with you a little bit of what President Biden had to say about this very issue. And I want to bring my brother, Dr. Jason Nichols, back into the frame as we have this part of the conversation as well. Doc, something that the president has, always touted is he always has put himself out there as being this guy who will save voting rights in this country, is particularly for Black folks, right? Because he understands the fact that he really could not be in office. And I think this is not even just us talking as Black people. I'm saying in white spaces, white media, it has been admitted. President Biden would not be President Biden if it were not for the Black vote, for Black voters.
Yeah, that's a fact.
It wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So the president went to Ebenezer Baptist Church. Now, last year when he went to Ebenezer Baptist Church, he really, of course, it's 2020, this is 23, 22. So he really pumped up the fact that he is going to get things done for voting. That was literally last year in January of 2022.
Yeah.
In January 23, look, one thing you can say about President Biden, either he forgot that he made this promise and he was at the church when he made this promise, or he a bold dude, you know what I mean? Like, he a bold man to go back to the same church and to say to the people, progress is slow. All right, so let me just share with you what the New York Times, how they put this thing out there, because again, this is not Black folks talking. This is coming from the New York Times. And Keenan, I'm gonna try to send this quote to you. But look, here's what how the New York Times reported it. When they said Mr. Biden a year later returned to Atlanta on Sunday with little to show for voting rights. It said he may not have flinched because he said, "I will not flinch, I will not yield." But he did not succeed either. None of the sweeping voting rights measures he championed passed the Democratic-controlled Congress last year, and the prospect of any passing a newly elected Republican-controlled House seemed vanishingly small. And so a leader who arguably owes his presidency to the critical and timely support of Black voters in 2020 was left to offer only vague exhortations of hope and no concrete policy plans or legislative strategies. The president went on to say, look, I get accused of being an inveterate optimist. Progress is never easy, but redeeming the soul of this country is absolutely essential. If the soul of the country is rooted in the idea that the people, that democracy is what? Is powered by the people. The soul of the country is rooted in the idea that the people essentially choose their leadership, the importance and value of that the people, the will of the people is what guides the country. That's the real work. That's the soul, to get the people to trust their own decision making and to trust those who they choose to represent them. This is the crux of the quote unquote the American experiment called democracy. Then how is this not as important? How you say you're going to save the soul of the country if the people feel like their voice is not being heard?
Right.
I'm trying to understand this, Dr. Jason Nichols. I'm trying to understand what is the president really saying here. So he can say, we were going to sell this. The soul of the country isn't tech. The soul of the country isn't business. Hell, it's not even education. The soul of the country is civic participation. The soul of the country is this idea that we, the people, are the ones to determine our fate. We, the people, are the ones to dictate the agenda.
Right.
We, the people, are the ones that speak up. What am I missing here, bro?
I don't think you're missing anything. And I think the person who's missing something is President Biden, and he needs to explore other options. I understand that, and it's interesting that Democrats seem to always campaign on things that they can't deliver. They campaigned in the midterms on codifying Roe. They're not going to be able to do that. As a matter of fact, they're hoping to block some of the GOP efforts to truncate those efforts, to make it, women's health care less accessible. So, I mean, it's I understand that, the dynamics of the House and the Senate, but he's not even saying like, I'm going to fight. I'm going to look at other options.
Right.
Like, he's just like, yeah, progress is slow. Maybe in the next term, you know what I mean?
Like there's no, right. Where's the assurance that, we're going to get some things done. Let me put in an executive order somewhere. Let me use my bully pulpit. Let me do this. Right. Like that's the part, Doc, that I'm not understanding. It's like you come in. Look, the New York Times said that we are the critical voting bloc that the president needs. We made the president.
Right. And he's going to pay the price if he runs again and black people have, their voting rights curtailed. He better try to get out there and start talking about this issue. Because if black people, number one, if black people don't think that you're working in their interests, all you do is talk about other issues, is not going to help him in the long run. We know black people are the ones that got him to where he is. There's not even a question. You don't win Georgia. You don't win Pennsylvania without Philadelphia. You don't win Wisconsin without, Milwaukee and a lot of the African Americans voting there. You don't win Michigan without Detroit. Like, these are the people who are driving, that drove that 2020 Biden-Harris campaign to victory. So don't forget where you came from, President Biden.
And you can't forget where you came from. And you said this as, look, one thing that Dr. King has done and has shown us is consistency and his tenacity, right? His ability to persevere against so many different odds. And for us to have this conversation, for the president to come into the space of the great Dr. King and say, hey, I didn't come through on my promise, but trust and believe I got y'all in mind for the soul of America. Like, it's the president.
Right.
It's the president. I mean, you can't speak from the very pulpit that Dr. King spoke, who literally died in trying to create some very important, substantial change.
And you know what, Farajii? Not only is what you're saying correct, but Dr. King, if you read the letter from a Birmingham jail, the whole thing was people saying progress is slow. Wait.
That was his big argument against white liberals.
Yeah, he was like, all you tell us is to wait. And he's like, no, waiting oftentimes means never. No, I'm not gonna wait. We're gonna do direct action. We're gonna actually go after this. And the fact that Joe Biden would go to Ebenezer Baptist Church and say that, and that be his message, is so incredibly tone deaf. It's ridiculous.
I can't understand it. And here's the thing. This is something in the last year of Dr. King's life, he was going through a lot of turmoil because of his stance on the Vietnam War. And folks, we're going to talk about this in the next segment, so stick around. But when he was trying to get some R&R, he was traveling to Mexico. He made a stop in Dallas, Texas. He ran into Reverend Billy Graham, the Billy Graham. And Billy Graham said, you know, Dr. King, I see you're a man that's trying to do some good things. He said, but y'all Negroes need to slow down. He told Dr. King this when Dr. King was trying to ramp up the opposition against the Vietnam War. He said, y'all Negroes need to slow down. See, this is the messaging that we've been getting for 50 years. Mm-hmm. So when we hear that, and when I'm hearing that in 2023, progress is never easy. Progress needs to, come on, Mr. President. No, sir. No, sir. Yeah. Progress is never easy. Nobody expected it to be easy. It's been 50 years. Nobody is there's no other group of people that is experiencing this level of slow progress other than Black folks in this country.
Right. Yeah, we know it's not easy. Come on.
We already know that. That's stating the obvious. I mean,
who was getting sprayed with the water hoses and chased with the dog? We know progress isn't easy, but we know that we don't resign ourselves to wait, slow down, it'll happen. No, we don't do that. And you're supposed to be our advocate. We put our trust in you. Our trust in you is our vote. So you need to advocate for us, if you want to actually win some of these elections and move forward. I think the Democratic Party can't forget. Absolutely.
Look, we're going to see, and I'm sure there's going to be some backlash, Doc. So, by the time, God willing, you get back on here next week, we're probably going to have this conversation again. Be like, remember last week? There's going to be some back. If not, then let us raise our voices here on the Black Star Network to let folks know that this is unacceptable from a president who said he would not yield and he would not flinch. Because it looks like right now his spine is a little bit rubbery, and looks like he's pumping the brakes on some things. I might be wrong, but that's what I'm getting. Dr. Jason Nichols, my brother, thank you so much for joining us as always. He's Dr. Jason Nichols, professor, lecturer of the African American Studies program at the University of Maryland, always joining us, and he will now be joining us on Mondays. So here on The Culture. So Dr. Nichols, looking forward to reconnecting with you soon. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you, my brother.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. Can we talk about Dr. King? Can I really talk about Dr. King and why we need to talk about the very full and real history of Dr. King? That's my next segment with you, and I want to have it with you, my online culture crew. So stay tuned for that conversation up next here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
The Irish of it. We're never on top, always stepped on, but we are optimistic. Like Dr. King.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation here on this very, very important day as we are celebrating this. The whole country continues to celebrate our beloved leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, it was 55 years ago today, folks, 55 years ago where that Dr. King was killed. But this is his birthday. His death day of that unfortunate assassination was April 4th, 1968. So this has been 55 years in the making of how we look at the impact, the life, the legacy of Dr. King. And so I thought it would be important for us to have a very different conversation. And my hope and prayer is that we can have this conversation to shed some light on some things about Dr. King. And I want you to join me. So I want you to check in with me as you can post your thoughts in the comment section as we're streaming right now on YouTube and on Facebook. And make sure y'all check us out on Black Star Network as well. But I'm calling this segment, and this is coming from what I heard Brother Tavis Smiley say yesterday as he related to the words of Dr. Cornel West. He said Dr. West said to him that we are living in the Santa classification of Dr. King. I want to say this word again, folks, because you know how Dr. West can get with words. But he called it the Santa classification of Dr. King. And what does that mean? That we have made this very real man with a real wife, real children, who was living in a very real time, that a man that had very real struggles, who endured very real heartbreak and pain. We have taken his life and his legacy and his mission and has put it into almost a space of being a myth. And when you look at how we have now told the story of Dr. King, it is highly whitewashed, very sanitized, very homogenized, almost to the point of looking like a different person. And every year at this time of year, as I'm growing more and more and I'm learning more and more about our beloved leader, I wonder to myself, if Dr. King was living today, or he was able to see how his life, his struggle, his sacrifice, his commitment was being told, characterized, how his story was being narrated, how would he feel today? And so when we're looking at this, we take our brother, and I'm saying, and I know what it's easy for us to talk about these things from a space of how white media, white books, in terms of the history books that we have all been, familiar with. It's easy for us to talk about it from that vantage point because there is, I believe there is not enough emphasis, where we really look at Dr. King's history in full in its proper context. And here's why. I was blessed to be a part or to attend the SCLC's celebration of Dr. King last night here in Los Angeles. And at that great celebration, we heard, and I had posted a couple of these speeches on my Facebook page. But at that great celebration, we heard from LA City Mayor Karen Bass, who talked about the work that she's doing and continuing to do and the history she's been making. We heard from one of the great scholars, historians, and pastors of our time, who was a great comrade to Dr. Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. James Lawson III, who talked about how scripture has been distorted for white purposes. And this is what Dr. Lawson made the point of, that our understanding of religious freedom, our understanding of God, is through the lens of white people and our oppressors and slave masters. And then I got the chance to hear from Brother Tavis Smiley, the broadcaster and journalist. And I was so happy to hear from all of these folks because they all dropped jewels. But one of the things I really appreciated about what Brother Tavis was saying, when he broke down the history of Dr. King in his final year. He wrote a book, folks, and I would highly encourage you to check this book out because we always do this book. Check out the book, and Keenan, if you could pull up the book cover. If you haven't read this book, he wrote this book called Death of a King. He wrote this book with David Ritz, the real story of Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr. final year. And this book, let me just tell you, folks, this book opened my eyes about the great trials and tribulations that Dr. King had to endure in his final year of life. The book starts off April 4th, 1967. The same day, a year earlier, a year to the day of when Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. April 4th, 1967, folks, Dr. King took a stand that forever changed his life. And most importantly, it was a stand that shook America, a stand that caused him to become the most hated Black man in America. See, we don't often talk about the crucifixion. Brother Tavis was talking about this, of course, in the spiritual terms. He said, when you talk about Jesus, he said that we often talk about the resurrection, but we don't go too far or too deep into the crucifixion. The same way we put up Dr. King, because we look at his story and we've mythologized, add this mythology to it. But we don't talk about the great struggles of Dr. King. And in his final year of life on this planet, Dr. King endured more hatred, more disdain. He was shunned more in his final year of life because he took a stand where he made a great speech. And this is probably one of his most greatest speeches that we probably don't even remember. But he took a stand. He spoke at Riverside Church in New York City. And he talked and became very critical about America's involvement in Vietnam. And during that speech, he made the statement that America, you are the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet. That sentence, that speech, took Dr. King from being just a civil rights leader into an international peace activist at the expense of the support that he can do, that he had garnered all the way up to that point. It took him to becoming one of the most beloved, one of the most celebrated, one of the most praised Black men in America to becoming the worst, and he was rejected within a year's time, folks. Take a look at it, and the history will bear me witness. History will bear me witness. Now, why don't we talk about this part of Dr. King's legacy? Why don't we talk about this part of his history? because there is something that I think that we continue to promulgate as not just Black folks, but this country. But let's just deal with us. It's easy to accept our civil rights leaders, and this has been the case, and this is probably why we have, some of us have this love, and some of us even don't want to admit it, that we don't like Dr. King because of how his story has been presented to us. Not because that's actually who he was, but because of how the story has been presented to us. For Dr. King's story has always been one of meekness, great humility, weakness, one where we see Dr. King getting hit in the head with bottles as he's marching and protesting, one where he's talking about loving each other, one where we're talking about racial equity and racial integration. But Dr. King was actually a radical. When I was listening to Reverend Dr. James Lawson yesterday, folks, and listening to what my brother had to say about how they use the Bible as the guide for their nonviolent strategy, because it was a strategy. It wasn't that they were weak men and women, but they decided to use a strategy to bring about an awareness to the ills facing Black folks. And when he used that, he made the point that this strategy was to be an inflection point for America, and it became one. It became one. But more importantly, when we look at how Dr. King has used that strategy, and then as he was growing, he grew a lot from that great speech of I Have a Dream in 1963. Let's move fast forward to 4 years later to 1967, where he's not just talking about civil rights and nonviolence in America. He's talking about racism, poverty, and militarization in this whole country, and the level of imperialistic colonial control that America has wanted to use to dominate other countries. Now he became a threat. He wasn't a threat when he was just talking about voting rights. He became a threat when he spoke against the economic, political, and imperialistic interests of this country. And we got to be real about that. And that is to show us, as we take our next pause, folks, that is to show us that when you stand up and you speak truth to power, you are going to be shunned, you are going to be rejected, you're going to be hated on. And what kind of model would that serve the next generation? I'm going to take this quick break. When we come forward, I got some more to share with you, but I want y'all to think about this. I really want you to think about this. Join me in the conversation. Post your comments in our chat section, and we're streaming on YouTube and Facebook and Black Star Network. And let's really have a conversation about the Santa Clausification of Dr. King, why we must know his full and complete history, because we can't become empowered. We can't stay at 1963. We got to move up to 1968. What happened in that 4-year time span? How did Dr. King become beloved and hated by the last year of his life? We'll continue the conversation, so I hope you stay tuned. It's The Culture right here on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, welcome back. I wanted to have a special conversation as we continue to celebrate the great life and legacy of our dear beloved leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I wanted to kind of just bring to light some of the things that we may not be privy to, that a lot of us, and I'm including myself, folks, it wasn't until I read Tavis Smiley and David Rich's book, Death of a King, that opened my eyes about what was going on in the final year, literally the final year of Dr. King's life, when he made that great statement. He took that major stance of opposing the Vietnam War that was brewing at that time. And it forced me to take another look at my brother, and to take another look at how we are as a people, because in the midst of all of this opposition, I was trying to pull up some information. The New York Times wrote an op-ed, or they put out a story. They called it Dr. King's Era. This was like April 7th, 1967, 3 days after Dr. King spoke at Riverside Church in New York City. They said Dr. King's Era. And this was the beginning of the end, so to speak, of what Dr. King had to endure in the final years of his life. You know, we all hope and pray that in our final year of life, that we can kind of like tie loose ends and build and to just kind of be able to make that transition in a way that we can go peacefully. But Dr. King didn't go peacefully. Dr. King, in his final year of his life, was so worn and beat up on. And I'm not just talking about white people, I'm talking about by black folks. So and I'm going to share with you a little bit about that, but that's why we're having this conversation and going back to what Dr. Cornel West calls the Santa Clausification of Dr. King. We can't make the life and legacy of our dear beloved brother and leader a myth. We can't sanitize it anymore. We can't act as if he didn't do certain things or he didn't endure certain struggles. That man endured great struggles. He was so hated on because of his opposition to the war. He was so hated on because he called America out. He became the mirror that America did not want to look into. That there were actually calls on his life in 1967 that some people were said that Dr. King would be better off dead. They said this for 1967, creating the winds, right? Creating the culture and the environment that when Dr. King went into those places in the final years, and this is something Brother Tavis Smiley brought up in the speech yesterday. He said, if you look at the speech in the mountaintop, that great speech where he said, Dr. King said, I may not, I've seen the mountaintop. I may not get there with you. Why did he say I may not get there with you? Because there were so many different things, so many things that caused his paranoia. And it was also documented that Dr. King had actually experienced a deep level of depression as a result of the rejection that he was receiving for his stance against the war. Let me share something else that you may not have known. And I didn't know this too until I looked it up. Now, another thing is that he died at the age of 39, folks. But when they opened up his body, they said that his insides looked like a 69-year-old because of the level of stress and depression and mania that brother suffered in his final year. Come on, man. But this is the part of the story that we don't talk about. This is the part of the story that we tend to leave out. What happened? Do you think Dr. King from 1963 stayed on that track? He was a theologian. He was a philosopher. He was always evolving in his consciousness about where things are. They always put up Dr. King versus Malcolm X. No, and Dr. King never had a real conversation with Malcolm X. I want to just correct that for history purposes. They didn't have a sit-down meeting. They crossed paths, but there was never a sit-down meeting. I had to learn that myself, folks, so don't be surprised if you don't know. But he spoke with a lot of different leaders, including the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He spoke to leaders from the Black Panther Party, from the Pan-Africanist community, the nationalist community. And guess what? during the final years of his life, he started to turn his attention away from this idea of racial integration into a more pro-black stance. Let me tell you how did that happen, or how do you know? He started to use different terminology. He stopped using the term Negro and started to use the term black. Take a look at it, folks. I wouldn't lie to you, especially not about this on this great day. His ideas were becoming what some would say more radical because he was being exposed to different political thought. And that's why he said to Harry Belafonte, Mr. B, I think I have done a great mistake in integrating my people into a burning house, talking about this idea of integration. Check the history. All right, look, I'm going to get some thoughts from you because we're laying out a lot. And I know that for some of you, you probably say, Farajii, where are you getting this information from? I'm getting it from the book. I'm getting it from the history. Because I had to look at this stuff myself and I say, man, this is really happening. And if young people knew that Dr. King at every step of the way, you may not have necessarily agreed with some of his tactics, but that every step of the way, he was a man that was constantly thinking about us, Black folks, not just for the church folks. He was thinking about all these different factions in the Black community, but more importantly, he was thinking about making the type of progress. He wanted to make the progress quicker and faster. He wanted to quicken the pace and make it faster. That's why, going back to that piece, that when he would travel in his final year, he got so paranoid. And like I said, Brother Tavis Smiley brought this up, that he said, look at his eyes in that video. His eyes are darting all over the place. And how does a man know that he's about to be assassinated? Look at the way he spoke. How does a man, we don't know when that time will come, but this man had an innate feeling. He knew that the moment that he spoke out against the Vietnam War, the moment that he spoke out against America and her being the purveyor of violence, he knew that an X was on his back. He knew that he had a bullet with his name on it. He knew, and he only knew that. All right, let's go to, I know this is a lot, folks. This is a lot, but this is the history. All right, let me go to Tia. Tia Z, Tia, thank you for checking in. You said, unfortunately, we choose to cheer for the image that whites like. Part of it is because many of us don't know King's other side, including the beginning of the I Have a Dream speech. Facts. Tia, come on, sister. Brother Tavis talked about this yesterday. He was like, we can say that part that he's looking for the content of the character, but we don't know the first half, that first part of the speech. And the only other part of the speech that we may know is that free at last, free at last. But there is so much more. So Tia, to your point, there's so much more that we need to know just in that speech alone. And some people have said that that's the greatest speech that Dr. King has ever made. I beg to differ. I think it was a great speech, but it wasn't one of his not the greatest. Because why? You're putting us in 1963. You're putting us in a Dr. King that hasn't fully evolved yet. Let's talk about that Riverside speech. While I was on air, folks, earlier today, CNN put out 10 places that shaped the great life and legacy of Dr. King. They talked about Memphis, Tennessee. They talked about Birmingham, Alabama. They talked about Montgomery, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia. Nobody speaks about New York City. They even talked about India with Mahatma Gandhi and how he learned about the principles of nonviolence. But nobody talks about the fact that in New York City, he made one of the greatest stands that no Black leader at that time in that space was willing to make. And I'm talking about coming from the church. Nobody talks about New York City. Very quickly before we get to our comments, Keenan, let's pull up with Ralph Bunche, because as a result of his stance, there were a number of civil rights leaders and organizations that opposed Dr. King in his stance. Ralph Bunche being one of them. This is coming from the King Institute. They said in an interview, Mr. Bunche said, Right now, I am convinced he is making a very serious tactical error which will do much harm to the civil rights struggle. I refer to the merging in his recent speeches of the civil rights movement and the crusade against the United States' involvement in Vietnam. Responding to his critics, King maintained that, quote, no one can pretend that the existence of the war is not profoundly affecting the destiny of civil rights progress. Come on, man. King was a large thinker. You can't talk about civil rights in America, in the belly of the beast, and then not condemn the actions of America abroad. Ralph Bunche was afraid. It's all right. Let's just say it for what it is. He was afraid. The NAACP, Keenan, let's post this one. This is the headline from the NAACP, if we can post that. The headline said, in the New York Times in 1967, right after Dr. King made his speech, the NAACP decries stand of Dr. King on Vietnam, calls it a serious tactical mistake to merge rights and peace, drives fears harm to both causes, NAACP, to avoid stand on Vietnam. Dr. King was trying to take the Black struggle, the struggle of the poor, the struggle of the marginalized to the next level, and NAACP wasn't with that at the time. The Urban League wasn't with that at the time. Major Black leadership and Black-led institutions and programs were against Dr. King and his stance against Vietnam. Check the history. All right, let's go back to our online culture crew. All right, look, let's take a quick pause. When we come back, I'm going to get more of your thoughts, but I'm sharing this with you because I don't want to keep hearing about the I Have a Dream speech. We can talk about that. We can talk about racial equity. We can talk about racial integration. My sister, Donna Brazil, put out a piece earlier for the Griot where she talked to him and she referenced Dr. King. And I love Donna Brazil. I think she's one of the most brilliant political minds that we've produced. But she referenced the Dr. I Have a Dream speech. I've seen more and more Black thought leaders putting out this, going back to I Have a Dream. Why aren't we talking about the fact that Dr. King stood against militarization? He created the Poor People's Campaign. Why can't we talk about the fact that he not just talked about racism as being a moral issue, but how it was a systemic issue? We got to have a conversation. Stay with us, folks. We'll continue the discussion right here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, welcome back to the show. We're talking about the Santa Clausification of the great life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's stop making our brother a mythological figure. He become like a leprechaun or something, a unicorn. I'm saying that seriously, folks. We have made our brother, Dr. King, this other than person. instead of being the black man that he was, the black man that he was growing to become, the black man who suffered at the expense of trying to do something to change the reality of life for both black and white people, the black man who understood his role. I think he came to, when we heard that mountaintop speech, I think this was a man who came to grip to understand that he wasn't going to live long. He was 39 years old, folks. How many of us would actually know when that time would come? But see, sometimes God will bless you with a little insight about the end. If you follow, if you are a good servant. And Dr. King was a fantastic servant of the God, of the Lord. Do you know? Well, I'm going to share this other point about it. I'll get to that point in a minute. I'm just so filled up, man, because I hope and pray that this segment, and more importantly, the information and the history that we're sharing with you today, you will go and fact check yourself and trust and believe. You can always say, Farajii, you were wrong on this, but I trust. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. But if you can find some error in it, I will be sure to come back on this platform and apologize and make sure that we state the facts right, because I want to make sure that we're right on this. I want to make sure that we're right on this. The Santa Clausification of Dr. King has to end. It has to end. All right, Conscious Thought, my guy, you said, as Coretta Scott King once said, and you're paraphrasing, I got you, Conscious Thought. You said it wasn't until Martin started to talk about the money that they killed him. What money, Conscious Thought? What money are we talking about today that America is currently spending billions on? What effort? We're talking about the war in Ukraine and Russia. A war that doesn't seem to be ending. A war that's encompassing other countries, that's shaking up international industries. A war that has a very real, serious global impact. 45 billion. I mean, we've thrown around these numbers, right? As if, Conscious Thought, like as if this is small numbers. These are not small numbers. 45 billion for a war, to prosecute a war that the American people don't believe in. I'm going to say that again. We're putting more money behind a military effort that the American people, the will of the American people, the majority of the American people don't believe in. So if Dr. King was with us today, would he speak out about this war? Would he be able to share with us what's coming in, what's coming over the horizon, as we're starting to see other countries getting pulled in, the continent, the motherland getting pulled in? You got China coming in, civilized nations that are being drawn into this situation that's creating a larger problem, not just for America, but for the rest of the globe. Come on, how would Dr. King respond? Will he just want us to just look at this war and the prosecution of this war and the politics around this war as if this war, the money behind this war, doesn't impact what's happening here what's happening domestically? Would he tell us to keep our mouths shut? That man died with no money. He didn't have a lot of money. There are reports that say that there was often conversations that he would have with his wife. And this was with Malcolm as well. These men put their lives on the line. They put the well-being of their families on the line. I mean, come on. And that's why they will forever be spoken of in history, regardless of who writes the history book. But we all know that when you say Malcolm X or Dr. King or any other great one, that respect has to be shown. But Dr. King put himself out there, crisscrossing the country, trying to get people to think differently, trying to wake us up about what's going on with the war, trying to organize and galvanize the Black church and the churches behind the lack of moral authority when prosecuting this war. And everybody in America, from Washington to Birmingham to folks in California and all across this country, was telling Dr. King, shut up. You're not relevant anymore. No one wants to listen to you anymore. Some of me went as far as to say, you stepped out of bounds, Dr. King. You went too far. Stick to the little Negro civil rights issues that you are accustomed to. And let us handle what we are accustomed to. So you don't become a threat until you start to really get into somebody's pockets. And you don't become a threat until you start to get into somebody's power. When you start interfering with their pockets and their power, oh, you become a real problem. All right, let's go back to what you got to say. Valerie, my sister, you say, yup. He was rejected by his own. Tell the truth. Same with Malcolm. Enemies within. Yeah. 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 And look, we hear about the great ones, right? Some of the great ones still got the fire. Like I heard Reverend James Lawson still got the fire. We talked about our late great Congressman John Lewis still had the fire. But some of them around him, they acquiesced to the enemy. They acquiesced to those who were against the rise of civil rights and Black liberation. We don't always know their names, but there were a number of men and women around Dr. King who couldn't take the heat because he lost friends as a result of that stance. He lost a lot of friends. They were with him during the being in the shade during the coolness of the day. But when that shade was gone, when he didn't have the protection, quote unquote, he wasn't the friend of the president anymore. In that final year, he wasn't the friend of the president, and therefore he was exposed to the heat. Please. It's sad, folks. It's sad. Now, here's the thing. As we take a look at this situation, I want to make sure I want to bring up some more information here about my brother. So when you look at how Dr. King started to speak more and more and more, and his voice was being muted less, and look at what was happening at the time that he was making this speech. And this is the other part about it. Because Dr. King understood, like I mentioned earlier, he understood his role. He understood where he stood in the landscape of social justice and civil rights as they were emerging voices that were coming up at the time. So imagine you being this guy, this man. You were praised a couple of years earlier. You were honored with the Nobel Peace Prize. People, I think it was Time magazine that put him out there on the cover and say he was the most important Black man in America, or the important Negro in America. You getting all of this praise, then you make a stance, and then it's like everything closes down. The walls are coming in on you. The ceiling, the sky is falling on you, right? So you have white liberals who are against you. You have the Black bourgeoisie who are against you. You got the civil rights organizations who you helped to establish, who was able to be established as a result of your work, turning against you, right? And you got the black youth, who was then being shifted from following the likes of a Dr. King to following now much more vocal and radical voices at the time, quote unquote, like a Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. Or they were following the voices of like a Huey P. Newton of the great Black Panther Party. So Dr. King made this great stance in April of 1967. What else happened in 1967 for Black folks? Well, in October of 1967, the Black Panther Party was officially started. And they were building because they came out of a yearning for a new voice that spoke to the hurt and the pain of the inner city. And Dr. King understood that. He understood that. But the young people in the street didn't want to hear Dr. King no more. They wanted to hear from a Huey, especially after the assassination of Malcolm X. They wanted to be more direct action, in your face, enough is enough type of politics and philosophy. And it's important that as we have this conversation, folks, I want to implore you, talk to the people who lived during that time, talk to those family members and ask them, what was it like? Because, yeah, everybody could talk about 63, but talk to them in about 67, 68. Black folks were on fire. We were on fire. We had enough is enough. And the government saw it, the world saw it, and everybody knew that a change was coming. As our brother Sam Cooke talked about, that change was coming, and it was coming fast because there was a new consciousness now. If the man who was often touted as the civil rights leader, as this man who was often seen as a racial integrationist, as a man who some folks would deem as a go along to get along type of man, and he wasn't that man, but that's how they characterized our brother to be. If he starts talking about the violence that America imposes on her citizens and other countries, if he starts taking a harder stand on these big issues, then you got Huey Newton and the Black Panthers on the West Coast. Then you got the Nation of Islam moving with Malcolm. Then you got all of these schools of thought about Black power emerging in this country. Something has to give. The enemy of our rise will have to say enough is enough. It has to say something, enough is enough. Norma, you checked in. Norma Hamilton, you said if certain people cared that much about MLK, they wouldn't have killed him. Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, Norma, because before they kill any Black leader, let me share with you very quickly, then we're going to have to take another pause. Before they kill any Black leader, let me tell you, when those type of efforts are made, folks, they're not made in no vacuum. They are planned. It's not some haphazard, coincidental thing. No, this is planned stuff. We saw it in Judas and the Black Messiah. This is planned stuff that takes time to germinate. So when you're talking about the assassination of a powerful Black voice in America, whether you're talking about then or you're talking about now, the first thing you have to do is use propaganda to make sure that you create a sentiment of hatred against the person that you are targeting. The sentiment of hatred, the sentiment of disdain, the sentiment that the person that you are targeting is no longer relevant, or they are standing in the way of the larger progress of the people. That's the first part of the plan. Because you just don't pull the trigger while the person is well respected. You don't pull the trigger while the person is loved. You gotta make them look ugly in the sight of their supporters, in the sight of their own people, before that bullet, before that trigger is pulled. You gotta make them look ugly. You gotta make them look like they're the problem, that you aren't making the type of gains that you want to make. And that's what essentially started. That's what happened to Dr. King. But the emotions of us as Black folks were ripped up in such a way that once we turned our back on our brother, it opened the door. It opened the door. It opened the door for murder to take place, for an assassination to happen. But you first have to whip up the sentiments. You have to influence the court of public opinion to be on the side of this idea that this person is a problem. And this is how our Black leaders are often painted. This is the same playbook, folks, that's been used for year in and year out. Whenever there's a powerful Black voice, you know that they have to whip up the sentiment of the people before that final decision is made. And I'm saying to us in 2023, we have to be much more careful and conscious that that no longer happens again. We got to take another pause. When we come forward, I'm going to share with you one more element about Dr. King in his final year as we look at the full story, the big picture, and the Santa Clausification of Dr. King. Stay with me. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Your money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We got a few moments left. And as we have this continued conversation and just sharing this history, wanted to end out on this very specific point. And I appreciate all of my online culture crew for checking in. And let's have a conversation. We can continue to have the conversation. Make sure y'all follow me on my social media at The Real Farajii on Instagram, at Farajii on Twitter. I'd love to continue to have the conversation about the final year of the life and legacy of Dr. King, and more importantly, why it's important for us not to put him in a space of a mythology, but a real man, a very, very real man that suffered greatly for the gains of his people and for the gains of this country and really the world. And this is why I think that the Creator, that God, will always bless that man to be spoken of, because he gave it all. He gave it all. In my final piece around Dr. King, in his final year, do you know, this was something that was written in the book, Death of a King by David Ritz and Tavis Smiley, but it was also, again, public record. Dr. King had made a call to his secretary, and during the final, during his trip to Memphis, where he was joining those sanitation workers. And during that trip, he made a call to the secretary and I'm sure Pastor Damon and others, y'all will understand that back in the day, they had the pastors, the preachers, y'all had to kind of tell the secretary what your sermon is going to be for that Sunday, so she can get that sermon prepared, put it in the church bill, church notes, so people will know what to expect. Dr. King made a call to his secretary, and he told his secretary that he was inspired to talk about something. Do you know what his final speech would have been if he was alive to give it? Or what his speech would have been on that Sunday? Now, y'all thought Riverside, the speech about his opposition to the Vietnam War, was something. His speech that he was preparing for and being prepared for was not as sweet. The title of that great speech was Why America May Go to Hell. Y'all hear me? He said, Why America May Go to Hell was going to be the title of that sermon if he was blessed to give that sermon. That's a different Dr. King. This is not the Dr. King that was pro-America, quote unquote. This is not the Dr. King that talked about the goodness of the 50 states. This is not the Dr. King that we have been accustomed to understanding and learning about. This was a very different Dr. King. And that just goes to show you, let me just point this out. And from 1963 through up to 1968, in a course of 5 years, his evolution of thought changed dramatically and so quickly. Can y'all just ride with me on this for a minute, folks. In a 5-year period, he makes all of these mental, philosophical, ideological differences and gains in how he sees the world in just a small period of time of 5 years. I always thought that was fascinating because it's like he was so obedient to doing his purpose that he was given it accelerated. It accelerated his understanding of who he was and where he thought the people should go. So he was going to talk about why America may go to hell. Why don't we talk about that? What could you imagine with the brilliance, with the mastery of language, with the world traveler, with the ideological thinker, with the theologian and philosopher, with the mouth of that man would have said to speak to why America may go to hell? What would that speech been like? What would that sermon be like? Because it wouldn't have been a speech. It would have been a sermon. What would be the call to action? Because every sermon has a call to action. What would he have called us to do? Now, he wasn't able to give that sermon, but the fact that we got a little tidbit of the title should make us think and compel us to reflect deeply. Where was Dr. King's mind? He wasn't crazy. He wasn't insane. He didn't need to go to an asylum. His eyes were open. Now, he was not being reactionary, as so many of us think of Dr. King. We think of him being a reactive leader. He was being proactive. He was leading us to a certain place. So he put out a title, Why America May Go to Hell. Where is that leading us to? Come on. We got to talk about the full history of this great man. We do ourselves a huge disservice. We do the generations to come behind us a disservice when we don't talk about the full history. Anytime, and I implore you, because I do it now, anytime somebody tell me something from 1963, 1962, I ask them, well, do you know what happened in 1967? What happened in January of 1968, February of 1968, March of 1968? What happened in his final year? Because he didn't stay that way. There was an evolution. And we do ourselves a disservice, and we do ourselves wrong for teaching our children the half story or part of the story of a man who was much more deeper, who was much more radical in some cases, much more further along, much more progressive, much more of a visionary. That was our beloved brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I can't, in every year, I got to make this part of his history known because we're not talking about it enough. So I hope and pray that today, as we had this conversation, I know it's a little different. We didn't have a guest, but it was just an opportunity for me to share some pieces of history with you. Again, family, I would highly encourage you to take a look. Again, the book is called Death of a King by Tavis Smiley and David Ritz. More importantly, look at some of the things. And this is a research book. This is not no BS. This is not conjecture. This is not hearsay. This is research, a research documented book. But more importantly, do your own research to look into what happened in that final year. And I'm trusting and believe once you start looking, as I started looking, your mind, your eyes, everything will become enlightened to the point where you will say, I have never thought of Dr. King this way. And there's a reason. There's a reason we stay at 1963. No, we don't even go to 1964 or 65. But there's a reason. And I'm saying for us that we resist the reason, we resist the inclination to stay in 1963 by looking further and deeper into the life and legacy of our brother. So I thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. And again, we hope that you gained something from it. I thank all of you. I thank Dr. Jason Nichols for tuning in and being a part of the discussion. Folks, make sure that you continue to support us because, you know, unlike any other space, there's no other place we're going to have this type of exchange and dialogue other than the Black Star Network. So go to our website today, blackstarnetwork.com, where you can download the app for free. You can be a part of the great movement for Black media and continue to support us. We are streaming some fantastic segments and conversations that Big Brother Roland is having with leaders from across the Black diaspora about the life and legacy of Dr. King. Also, my piece around Gerard Carmichael. We put that out there, that little segment out there as well, that has gotten some momentum online. So I appreciate all of you for sharing it and letting people know about that. But we got a lot to talk about, folks. We got a lot to talk about. I want to thank my dynamic team, Joel, King Keenan. I want to thank the control room. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you, my online culture crew, for doing the great work of tuning in, being a part of the conversation. And folks, you know, you can always hit us up at The Real Farajii on Instagram, Farajii on Twitter. Follow Black Star Network on Instagram and Twitter, and let's keep the conversation going. All right, stay tuned. Up next is RMU, Roland Martin Unfiltered. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we'll talk tomorrow for another exciting edition of the culture here on the Black Star Network. I hope you have a great afternoon, wonderful evening. And again, happy Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Talk to you soon. Peace.